Sometimes it's worth referring back to this publication purely just to showcase the fact that a lot of the anti-racist slash critical race theory rhetoric that was once considered fringe now appears in Education Scotland publications with effective green lights or rubber stamps, if you will, from the SNP or the Scottish Government in general in many instances. The example being in this regard, if we come down, where they talk to, or Shirley Ann Somerville, sorry, is included here, where she says that over the last 18 months, global events, and we're talking about George Floyd, obviously, as well as the coup, presumably, they've shone a powerful light on the deep inequalities in our society, which disproportionately affect BAMEs, just for being BAME, you see. We must now grasp the opportunity to fully understand the issues at hand and to be bold. The SNP's favourite words. They pat themselves in the back and refer to their own policies as bold. And I know it's something that I pick fault with every time I see it, but it does sound pathetic. Anyway, innovative. You don't call your own policies that, but hey ho, in effecting meaningful and sustainable change, because it's all about that sustainability, despite the fact I even had somebody yesterday insinuating that I was talking shite. Well, why does the word keep appearing everywhere? It must be a coincidence, of course. Not related in any shape or form. Oh no, not at all. Anyhow, addressing these issues is full of critical importance. Critical, yes. Yeah, that's another word they love to use nowadays because it's a sort of subtle hint, especially when we're talking about racism, to a critical race theory. And they say here not only to allow the minority ethnic young people a sense of belonging, but in order that all our children and young people have the opportunity to become the types of citizens that we want to have in a diverse, right? This bit's a doozy. Yeah, fucking hell. Sorry, where I? A diverse and, not just a diverse, and an integrated Scotland for the future. So they're telling us right off the bat, or, that the Scotland will be diverse in the future. So it's just a question of whether or not that will be predicated on integration or not. And, remains to be seen. And our curriculum seek to promote and inspire a sense of belonging, inclusion, and of course social justice for learners, practitioners and the wider community. And racism of any form has no place in Scotland, so the education system provides an opportunity for learning, debates and leadership that will help us to eradicate racism in wider society. This new guidance sets out the imperative of embedding anti-racism into the ethos and practice of our education system, and it was developed by Education Scotland in collaboration with a range of young people who would have all been BAME, education practitioners who would have been BAME, probably, most likely, and organisations with lived experience of racism and expertise. Well, by default, they have to have been BAME. This new resource and its ambition, and look forward to continuing to work with young people, BAMEs, practitioners and the wider education and anti-racism community as we tackle the challenges and opportunities ahead together. And together they have been doing just that, as it was only a few weeks ago that Shirley Ann Somerville was trotted out again to STV News to talk about the new initiative that the SNP have put some of our taxpayers' money into funding for a fucking year, and that is Show Racism the Red Card, where they have given BAME pupils across Scotland, not every BAME pupil, only specifically selected ones of course, they get to be quote-unquote captains for Show Racism the Red Card, where they get to pick and choose which parts of the education system they find to be racist, whether that's abruptly racist, covert or subtle racism, etc., or whether it just kind of tingles or microaggressions from time to time and it gets them agitated. They get to pick and choose, they get to say what needs to change, they get to advocate for what needs to occur. And if you fucking think for a split second that they will be coming up with these suggestions and these ideas themselves, then you got another thing coming. Some of the problems that the BAMEs that were used for the news piece at the time were things to the effect of too many white characters in fucking textbooks. This is the level that we're at here in Scotland now, where even white people in textbooks irritates the BAMEs or upsets them or makes them feel like they're not included, and it seems to have completely been taken out of the conversation, the logic or the reality of the matter, that they're in Scotland, hence why everything is white for the time being, hence why the majority of our textbooks will be white, and again, on top of that, I think they fail to these textbooks that they will be talking about, all the whites, they're probably about 10, 20 years old. It's not like they're produced and reproduced every single year to accommodate the new influx of BAMEs that have come over the duration of the 12 months previous. Get a forward from HM Chief Inspector and Chief Executive, and I have no idea who the fuck she is. I didn't at the time, and I still don't now. All learners have a right to learn in an equitable environment where all cultures, religions, identities and languages are recognised and valued, and where the curriculum responds positively to the diverse needs of individual learners, reflecting the uniqueness of their communities. Now they're again referring to the UNCRC, which is really what I'm convinced is one of the major red herrings in all this BS when it comes to the constant propagandising of our youth, because the UNCRC, despite not even being enshrined in Scots law as of yet, the mere desire for these people to enshrine it into Scots law was all that it took for them to start acting as if they'd already done so, you know? And there's a plethora of these rights that children will get, including the right to be listened to and taken seriously, etc, etc. Hence the never-ending waffle of 6-year-old climatologists telling everybody about their issues with what's not been done quick enough, etc. And the camera will pan over to a head-bobbing politician, and we're supposed to pretend that that politician gives a fuck what that child's saying, but they then walk away and then start to tell the world that they're enacting policies based on what the 6-year-old has told them. And I know that I'm taking the piss to a certain extent, but that's more or less what happened after all the fucking climate strikes that were endorsed by the SNP and our mainstream media here in Scotland back in 2019. What was the response to that? Sturgeon comes waddling on out with the daft haircut that she never seems to change and declares a climate emergency. So we're expected to believe that a bunch of protesting children with placards that included sentences that they just copy and pasted more or less from a fucking textbook given to them, ironically enough, more or less, by the SNP, that was enough to twist Nicola Tinlips's arm, had it not been for the harrowing, bold and progressive protest by children who are being groomed and propagandised. Had it not been for them standing out in the fucking rain demanding imminent action, Sturgeon wouldn't have acted. Oh no, son, not the impending doom we all face here in Rainbow Unicorn Land as well as around the fucking world. If we don't act now, you know, we're all gonna die because of McCarbon, right? And that wasn't enough to convince her to do anything, but the children protesting was. Fuck off. The point is, though, that's an example of what's going on here with this UNCRC nonsense, because we have a right to be listened to and heard and taken seriously. So when they demand action, Sturgeon fucking has to act accordingly, right? And the same thing is true here. But this one's even more insidious because I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but essentially what it's implying is we're moving away from the concept of integration. So when BAME children in their abundance move to Scotland, instead of trying to ease them into our culture, we have to celebrate their own. We have to highlight the fact that they've got an identity that they're allowed to have, right? We have to highlight that. We have to celebrate that. They need to know all about that. But what that's effectively doing is ensuring that they don't integrate, you know? And the idea that's put forth to justify the excuse is that if we don't do this, we're othering them. We can't expect them to adopt our culture and integrate. That's othering. When the fuck was it ever considered othering? And I'm sorry, othering would be a consequence if you're a BAME migrant and you come here with a child. And if that's called othering, it's not our fault. It's the fault of the parent that took their kid here in the first place. But no, apparently in the fucking Rainbow Unicorn Land where everything is done by the book, and when I say the book, I mean the United Nations books, it seems that all logic went out the window a long fucking time ago. The actual website itself, and just in the topic of the UNCRC that they mentioned relatively briefly, and a small little segment, doesn't get as much attention as other subjects at hand, but look beneath the veneer of happy children in all the photos, or the YouTube channels in abundance where they're all talking about their rights and how they're excited for the UNCRC to finally be enshrined in law. Look beneath the stats and the statistics that they will provide to justify why they're doing this, such as a culture of acceptance regarding diversity becoming more prominent when a UNCRC-based, rights-based approach to education is implemented in multi-ethnic schools, etc. That's all very well and good, but the fact of the matter still remains the same in that respect. This isn't happening twofold. It's not like whites in abundance are moving to Kenya and Zimbabwe, and the Zimbabwean children are all being told that they need to ditch their Zimbabwean heritage in order to make the whitey feel like they're not being othered. This is only fucking happening here. Every single United Nations policy that's held up to such high regard, as if this is going to make the world a much more amicable place to live. Clear. It's quite clear when you just look past the shit that progressives will present you with to justify their cancer. You know? They can talk to no end. To no fucking end. What this is doing is effectively establishing a culture of acceptance, a susceptibility to diversity for the natives. That's all this says. Anyway, the thing that gets me the most about this page in particular is the stock image that they use. They're very young children, we can all see that. And then if the writing next to it on the left hand side though, where it says that a curriculum which represents everyone involves normalising diversity in the curriculum so that learners routinely see language, content and imagery that reflects the diversity of culture, identities and experiences, including their own. This normalising is more powerful than one-off lessons that explore diversity or celebrate difference. The latter can have the unintended consequence of othering those who are not from the ethnic group which is the majority. You know, so again, it's all about empowering and so again, it's moving away from allowing these children to integrate. Instead, we have to ensure that they are seen as different and they're allowed to celebrate their heritage, their identities. Paragraph by saying that normalising diversity within the curriculum as opposed to normalising the white majority ethnic group gives every learner the important message of being valued and belonging. As opposed to normalising the white majority ethnic group. You know, God forbid the white majority ethnic group is normalised, or the idea of the white majority ethnic group is normalised. It's Scotland after all. It should be a white majority ethnic group. Or is this suggesting that we should stop normalising that because it won't be forever? Is that what we're getting at here? Quite frankly, I don't know what the fuck they're getting at here, because it's not a normalised concept. There's not a process of normalising the white majority ethnic group. There's then a segment dedicated to telling us all about decolonising the curriculum. The term referring to interrogating the curriculum and questioning the source of content and the viewpoints represented. Muldoon, presumably a BAME, who knows, argues that it's about challenging long-standing biases and omissions that limit how we understand politics and society. And it's not simply about the token inclusion of a few BAMEs, but an underlying transformation from a culture of denial and exclusion to a consideration of different traditions of knowledge. To diversify our curriculum is to challenge power relations. Oh, of course, here we go. We're getting to the nitty-gritty now, are we not? You know, and call for deeper thinking about the content of our courses and how we teach them. Then it goes on to say even more that the term itself reflects the concern that literature, culture, successes and histories of groups impacted by racism are not sufficiently evident in the curriculum, and the historical role of Scotland in the colonies and in the slave trade has not been consistently explored and acknowledged within the curriculum. To understand the full complexity of decolonising, it's important to remember that racism is rooted in colonialism. When Western countries justified the enslavement of people by spreading their belief that these people were subhuman. We just went around the world enslaving people. It's not like these people weren't already fucking enslaved, you know, captured by their own people and sold to the Muslims, if not to us. At least we let them keep their cocks. After colonised countries gained their freedom, the long-standing power imbalance, because that's always what it seems to boil down to when it comes to these social engineers, these opportunists. They always talk about the power imbalances. That's why I find it laughable when you see the anti-racists doing it, because they try to give these big brain hot takes and they use words like power imbalance. But then you just look at a feminist publication and they say the exact same thing. They copy off each other. One of you is right, one of you is wrong. You can't both be right, surely. Yeah. Well, that's some sophisticated society that was created way back in the day. Not only were the white men of the world gallivanting around and enslaving everyone, they also had intrinsic plans drawn up to ensure that society structures, every single nook and cranny, was intrinsically racist and systemic and misogynistic, etc. And it's only now that the likes of James Muldoon from the University of Exeter is able to find what's really going on. The values and drive of the leadership team at both local authority and setting level are central to promoting and developing race equality and anti-racism. Right? Whether as an employer or employee, care must be taken to ensure that legal obligations are met. In settings that successfully embed race equality education and anti-racist practice, the leadership team works with staff, learners and parents to ensure that the ethos and vision of the school strongly promotes equality and challenges all forms of discrimination. Leaders at both local authority and setting level should support professional learning in anti-racist education for the staff. There is a designated lead person to take forward race equality, ensuring it's embedded across the curriculum, and learners have an important role in leading change. And then they've got a wee segment here called delivery. Clear messages in favour of equality are provided to learners, or children, if we're going by the stock photos that we've seen so far. These are simple and repeated consistently. So, simple and repetitive talking points about equality are provided over and over and over again. Clear and concise messaging. That sounds kind of like brainwashing to me. It's like you're forcing this as opposed to it becoming a natural thing. Which again, learners are encouraged or support to express their opinions through thoughtful processes, which include elaboration and reflection, that encourage the support to understand their individual role in challenging racism. Also, they all have individual roles, and despite the fact they could be 4 or 5 years old, they're going to have this responsibility placed upon them. They're going to have individual roles that they need to understand, and they'll be supported to do so. They need to be able to understand how they have a role to play in challenging racism. This includes helping them to develop the tools to analyse and respond to racism and to identify how racism exists within Scottish society, including institutions. So right off the jump there, you're redefining fucking words and you're getting away with it. You got carte blanche to do so because even the government do it. It's getting enshrined in every policy. Misogyny redefined, racism redefined, inequality redefined, you name it, it's been redefined. It's a standard practice at this point. But the fact is though, you're now doing this shit, this malevolent nonsense is being done to children. On top of all of that, they're also introducing the concept of racism in the institutions, that's the barriers, the systemic oppression, etc., which is all nonsense, but again, the activists peddle it, and now they're going to teach it to the children, making the next generation of activists, essentially. Or at the very bare minimum, it'll be a bunch of children, hypothetically speaking, that would grow up to understand why the activists that are out there are targeting these institutions and making these false claims about the barriers and whatnot. I mean, because they'll remember it all from when they were in school. Activities and content that demonstrate the reality of racial discrimination are balanced with those which motivate learners to act for racial justice. Being actively anti-racist should be presented as the norm. Being actively anti-racist is to be presented as the norm. Again, when we're talking about being actively anti-racist and how it should be presented as normal, it should be presented as the norm to whom? To the children, the white children, the Scottish children. So again, that's what I'm saying, you take a step back and you start to really reflect on what the fuck's going on here. There is something pretty dark about this, is there not? On from what I highlighted there, they say that learners should have the opportunity to reflect on their relationship with power in society. So here we go again, another reference to power. Too many white CEOs, too many white politicians, therefore that means that every white within the country has power. This encourages learners from majority groups to realise that their lived experience is not universal. So let me get this straight. Because in the context of Scotland, the parliament is made up of majority whites, that somehow devalues the fucking so-called lived experience of a Scotsman or a Scotswoman who might very well have a hard life. Their opinion, their lived experience is somehow secondary to a BAME because there isn't enough Tyrones and Kamals in the fucking parliament. This is what I'm talking about here. It's all very well and good for these academics and these experts to preach this nonsense to each other back and forth or have these discussions at committees with politicians or whomever. But there's another thing entirely to have carte blanche to design a website and print their shit knowing damn well that fellow anti-racists or aspiring anti-racists will take what's been written here and apply it to their classroom full of little Scottish children. Fucking disgusting. Of course, you are led to a multitude of different paragraphs of them debunking the idea of race, and it's good to know that it's coming from sociologists, They have to do this because it then justifies their claims where they say that race isn't, it's nothing to do with biology, and instead it's actually a system of social categorisation, as it says there, which advantages certain groups of people and disadvantages other groups of people, and this has resulted in real impact and caused untold damage. Finishing off here by saying that the system of social categorisation based on race has resulted in white privilege. I mean, okay. Well, they've got different types of racism now that they've categorised. So you've got interpersonal racism. This is prejudices, individual actions and discriminatory behaviours where a person makes assumptions about the abilities, motives and intents of other people based on race. This set of prejudices can lead to cruel actions, e.g. racist hate speech, and unintentional actions towards a person or group. Internalized racism occurs as a result of subliminal messages of racial inferiority and superiority present in society. This can cause minority ethnic people to internalize negative messages about their own abilities. Institutional racism is when institutions and organisations discriminate against minority ethnic people to limit their rights. The first thing that springs to mind is that the teachers in question, the anti-racist experts and the teachers, they hold these beliefs while they then enter the classroom, the school environment with your children. Isn't that something to be content with when you send your child away for the day? I wonder what type of racism they'll be learning about. I wonder if they'll be learning about their own internalised racism. Oh, no, they both are white, so that can't be a thing, can it? Equality and anti-racist education necessary. It empowers learners, children, to develop an understanding of their own values, beliefs, cultures, and those of others. Anti-racist education will help children to understand and realise their own rights and the rights of others. Anti-racist education helps learners to understand the harmful consequences of racism, helps to ensure that the learning environment is safe and inclusive without racial inequality or racism. Not to find racial inequality, of course, it nurtures a historical literacy in learners, which helps them to understand all of Scotland's history, including our historic role in empire, colonialism and transatlantic slavery, and the diversity of Scottish society in the past. They keep doing this. I've seen that written. It's just added in right at the end, and it's just this small little reference added in as if it's been forced in after the fact, and they say, and it's always word for word identical, verbatim, diversity of Scottish society in the past. So they've got this huge list of things that they want to discuss regarding historical role in empire and colonialism, transatlantic slavery, you name it, it'll be there. But then right at the end, just this tiny little reference to the diversity of our past. What the fuck are they talking about? Are they talking about Vikings? Are they talking about Romans? They're sure as fuck not talking about Kenyans, are they? Or Pakistanis? Or Indians? But they don't elaborate. So I still don't necessarily know just what they're talking about in that respect. I want to say that racism is a part of everyday life for BAMEs, even if they're not from a visible minority. It's part of everyday life. Oh yes, of course, because there's about 34,000 different variations of what racism could be. It's visible when it needs to be, it's everywhere when it needs to be, it comes in the form of microaggressions when it needs to be, it can be overt, subtle, you name it, it's there. We have 328 young people from a range of ethnicities, including white Scottish. You mean Scottish. Stop calling us white Scottish. I fucking can't stand that. If you're that hell-bent on eradicating the idea of race, then why do you keep referring to us as white Scottish? They found the vast majority of the young people in the study were positive about ethnic and religious diversity. Many had strong interreligious and multi-ethnic friendship groups, although some groups were more segregated. In terms of racism, minority ethnic young people describe ways in which they were categorised and seen as others by accent, colour, faith, dress, nationality and ethnicity. Racial slurs were experienced as well. More recently recognised forms of racism such as Islamophobia, anti-immigration attitudes and religious intolerance. The minority ethnic young people felt being the operative word, they had not experienced much overt racism, but they could all give many examples of everyday racism that they had witnessed. Everyday racism that they had witnessed, with them then unironically referring and describing fucking microaggressions. This is scraping the barrel. Progressions is that they are made to feel different by tone of voice or attitude. Tone of voice or attitude. Right? Fuck. Oh my god. Right, okay. So microaggressions, check. Subtle ways, check. Feelings, check. There's a lot of talk of feelings here, which is the equivalent of an anecdote, by the way. The ethnic young people born in Scotland had a strong sense of Scottishness, but some found that because of their skin colour, they were not perceived as Scottish. It's got fuck all to do with skin colour. I would pose the question to any BAME, any Pakistani, any Indian, whatever it may be, to take a DNA test, and we'll see how closely related they are, DNA-wise speaking, to the white Scottish, if you're going to call us that consistently. Let's see how close you are to it. Let's see how Scottish you really are. But now, of course, that's not good enough, and we can't do that, because what they want to present is the same thing that was being presented in that BBC documentary, where the only thing that has historically ever made somebody Scottish was whether or not they passed the white test. The idea of being a Scotsman is to be white. So if they can just eradicate the concept of white and replace it with, a non-racial identity, then all of a sudden everybody will be included. This is Graham Campbell from the S&B conference several years ago, that the future of Scotland is non-racial. You can play that narrative, to play that game for as long as you wish, and you can lie to yourself for as long as you want. There is a fundamental truth out there that these people consistently are attempting to bury, but no matter how long they attempt to bury it for, there's still a truth for all that. And that truth is that we're an ethnic group. But there's a wee segment regarding teachers where they say themselves that they have to abide by the standards that are in place, and that is a commitment to social justice, to fair, transparent, inclusive and sustainable policies and practice in relation to protected characteristics. Intersectionality gets a reference as well. It then goes on to say that respecting ecological, cultural, social, religious and racial diversity, and promoting the principles and practices of sustainable development of local and global citizenship for all learners. Race equality and anti-racist education recognises that our 21st century learners exist in a multicultural, multi-faith and global community, and such need to develop as global citizens with an understanding of structural racism, how it impacts on our world and how to overcome it. Okay, first and foremost, again, we all know that this is targeting our youth, but it's dressed up so you don't necessarily see that straight away. Because at the end of the day, the so-called structural racism that they speak of, the non-existent structural racism, doesn't fucking exist in their native lands, but it exists here. Red flag is when it says the following: of intercultural competencies, the attitude, skills and knowledge needed to interact positively and confidently with people who we may perceive to be different from us in some way, and in particular were the perceived differences on the grounds of ethnicity. Of course, because we are going to perceive people that aren't really supposed to be here as different. They themselves know they're different. We see them as outsiders. That's what needs to change.